Saint Nektarios of Aegina is one of the most important contemporary saints of the Orthodox Church, who was not only a bishop and miracle worker, but also a compassionate spiritual father to many people. In his life and teachings, Saint Nectarios has addressed numerous issues and topics pertaining to spiritual and worldly life, among which the various types of womanly struggles. Saint Nectarios believed that women have a unique and divinely given vocation, especially in their ability to shape the soul of children through family bonds, home education, and power of example. In his well-known work on the priesthood, although written primarily about clergy, he references the role of Christian mothers as vital to the spiritual formation of future generations. He often emphasized that the seeds of faith are most often sown in the hearts of children by their mothers at home during their critical formation years. The woman's role is thus not merely domestic, but has important prerogatives that extend into the educational and spiritual areas of the household. Saint Nectarios also spoke against the worldly tendency to judge women based on their appearance or status. He urged women to pursue inner beauty rather than external, and focus on developing their humility and modesty. One important vice that Saint Nectarios warns against was vanity, which he calls a distraction for a woman's true path towards Christ. For the saint, femininity was connected to spiritual prowess, as exemplified by the Theotokos herself, who remains the highest model of Christian womanhood. Saint Nectarios was also a great and dedicated supporter of female monasticism. He often foregone his ecclesiastical preoccupations in order to found and shepherd a nunnery, called Holy Trinity, that was built on the island of Aegina. Saint Nectarios, together with the nuns, created a very spiritual refuge for ascetic life, filled with prayer and deep commitment to our Lord. He continued serving as spiritual father and teacher to the nuns, encouraging them to pursue both spiritual depth and learning until his death. Additionally, Saint Nectarios wrote a very insightful book entitled On the Education of Mothers. His treatise presents a series of strong arguments, both philosophical and spiritual, on the importance of mothers as teachers in shaping both the intellectual and moral character of their children. Drawing upon scripture, the Church Fathers, classical philosophy, modern pedagogical professors, and his own pastoral insight, Saint Nectarios constructs a complex yet easy to understand vision of education that begins in infancy and places the mother at the heart of that formative process. The central premise of Saint Nectarios' argument is that education must begin from infancy, as the impressions formed on a child's earliest years are deeply ingrained. The soul, like soft wax, is easily molded in its early stages and is influenced both positively and negatively by the child's early life experiences. In order to support his position, he cites numerous prominent personalities such as Basil the Great, Phocylides, and Pestalozzi. At the center of the formative process for children is the mother. She is the first and most powerful teacher, not by formal instruction alone, but also by example and presence. Her voice, gestures, habits, and even her spiritual disposition will deeply influence the child. Saint Nectarios likens this formative power to a phonograph disc. The child records and reproduces the voice and spirit of the mother. Every word and action the mother makes can potentially impact her child's growth, either in virtue or in vice. But the influence is not merely psychological, but also deeply spiritual. The mother becomes, in Saint Nectarios' opinion, for the child, the first image of love, authority, and even represents God himself. Before the child can intellectually fully understand the concepts such as love, piety, or divinity, the child experiences them through motherly warmth. Saint Basil, reflecting on his own mother, Saint Amelia, writes that the image of God he formed in childhood through her teachings remained with him his entire life. Moreover, the famous Swiss educator Pestalozzi echoes this sentiment, emphatically saying that my God is my mother's God. It seems that for both saints and modern educators, the mother's role in revealing the divine to her children is essential. Education for Saint Nectarios must not be one-sided, as in only spiritual. The soul requires the cultivation of both mind and heart, the former through learning and the latter through religion. He warns that when a child's upbringing is tilted toward one of these poles at the expense of the other, the result is confusion and distortion. Secular learning without faith leads to lack of faith or atheism, while religion without logical understanding leads to superstition and fanaticism. A proper Christian education must therefore harmonize intellectual formation with a deep love for God, balancing reason and piety in equal measure. Saint Nectarios also addresses a common fear that parents have regarding their children's education, the fact that their teachers or professors could potentially lead them astray. To resolve this problem, the saint presents the examples of the mothers of the Church Fathers, Nona, Amelia, and Anthosa, who entrusted their sons, Saint Gregory the Theologian, Saint Basil the Great, and Saint John Chrysostom, to pagan educators for intellectual development, confident that the spiritual formation they had already given would remain unshaken. Their sons returned not weakened in faith, but stronger, proving that when a child's soul is firmly rooted in God, it can safely engage the world intellectually without fear of corruption. Furthermore, Saint Nectarios makes a profound argument that the regeneration of modern society depends overwhelmingly on the regeneration of the mother. Educated and pious mothers are the foundation upon which great and holy men are built. A healthy society simply cannot function without strong and faithful mothers. Saint Nectarios also cites Rousseau, who observes in his great work, Emilia, "If you wish the men to be great and virtuous, teach the women what greatness and virtue are." Simply put, to form the future generations, we must begin with those who form the first impressions, the mothers. In conclusion, On the Education of Mothers is not only a call to educate children well, but it is a well-thought and emphatic call for the education and raising of girls as well, in order to become the woman that society desperately has need for. First comes the piety of the mother, and then her children will follow suit. In mothers lies the personality blueprint of the future human person. Through their love and prayers, they transmit the Orthodox way of life ever since the dawn of Christianity. The mother is the child's first school, first icon, and first catechism, and when she is formed in virtue, the whole society will rejoice. We shall end this video with a fairly lengthy quote from Saint Nectarios on the issue of raising children and the role of mothers, from the above-mentioned work on the education of mothers. As educators for this age, nature has ordained the parents, and, especially, the mothers. It is necessary, then, because of this lofty duty of theirs, this duty of the educator, that we instruct these mothers suitably and raise them carefully, for they will serve their own children as images and models of which the children will become casts. To such an extent does the child imitate the virtues or the faults of his mother, and likewise her voice and manners, and moral character, and deportment, that one can quite appropriately compare children to the brass discs of the phonograph, which first receive the footprints of the voice, and then send the voice out again with the same pitch, the same expression, and the same color with which it was originally articulated. Every gesture, every word, every movement, and every action of the mother becomes the gesture and word and expression and movement and action of the child. This is why Asterios, Homily 5 on Matthew, says, "For one of the children preserves the likeness of his mother's voice, another assumes the greater part of her temperament. Another, with respect to the state of his moral character, has been given the shape of her who bore him." By constant togetherness with the child, and by the continuous display of the same dispositions, the mother influences the child's soul and moral character, and she is the first to give the first push toward the good. The mother, by a single glance, by a single kiss, by her sweet voice and her delicate caresses, can immediately arouse in the child's heart the leaning and inclination toward the good. Likewise, by a single disapproving glance, by a single tear falling on her cheeks, by a single expression suggestive of her heart's sorrow, she can remove the child from the most destructive danger of the heart. The child, nurtured in his mother's bosom, and warmed in his mother's embrace, begins to love before he learns the concept of love, and he begins to subordinate his will to the moral law before he learns the concept of the moral law, and it is the mother alone who is most suited to arousing in the child's heart his first conception of God. Because of this, Basil the Great says, in letter 223, "The conception of God which I received in childhood from my blessed mother, it was the conception, brought to maturity, that I had within myself. For I did not change from one set of opinions to another in the maturation of my reason, but rather I brought to completion the beginnings handed down to me by her." But just as every good action, every good word, and every good disposition of the mother constitute the cornerstone of the subsequent good actions, words, and dispositions of the child, so too do every bad action, word, and disposition of the mother contain the corruptive seeds of the subsequent bad actions, words, and deeds of the child, wherefore the child turns out to be such as his mother is. If, then, the mother's soul is ugly and malignant, or dark, or corrupt, or hard and harsh, and her inclinations evil, and her conduct scandalous and indecent, or if she tends towards irreverence, or towards anger, or toward frenzied passions and hatreds, there will quickly sprout up from the child as well the buds of these malignant vices. But if, on the contrary, the mother's soul is godlike, pure, cheerful, innocent, and full of the fear of God, and her inclinations generous and holy, and her dispositions peaceful, God-loving, and mankind-loving, then the child's soul, too, mirrored in such a mirror and imitating her unawares, turns out like her, and, as time goes on, exhibits the sprouting of the good seeds. Because of the great influence they possess over children, Mothers can fashion them according to their own character, just as the potter fashions the clay in accordance with his own design. Accordingly, mothers, both on account of their lofty vocation and on account of their subjective value, independent of this office, must receive from infancy the upbringing that befits them. And the upbringing that befits them is that which has the object of its formation, the mind and the heart, for these two things are the two poles around which both the intellectual and the moral formation of the human person revolve. We must, then, give our girls both learning and religion, so that they too may pass these things on to their own children. Learning and religion are two bright lighthouses guiding seafaring men on the billowy course of his life, and protecting him from every shipwreck and removing him from every dangerous reef. Only thus formed can mothers present virtuous children, good citizens, and brave men. We have before us, as radiant examples, the mothers of all great and virtuous men. We have before us, as radiant examples, the mothers of the holy three hierarchs, Basil the Great, Gregory the Theologian, and John Chrysostom. These mothers, desiring to educate their children as perfectly as possible and to polish their minds through Greek learning and knowledge, did not at all hesitate to entrust them to pagan teachers, so that they might be suitably developed intellectually. They considered the teachers' heterodoxy of no importance, because they had confidence in themselves, confidence that by their own example they had wholly channeled their own love for true learning and their fervent zeal for religion into their children's hearts. It is necessary, then, that we form our daughters religiously and intellectually, so that we may present them worthy of their vocation. It is necessary, then, that reverent education and educated religion exist side by side, for these two things are the only sure provisions for traveling in this life, provisions that are able to help a man in manifold ways.